Stephen King adaptations don't have a good track record. Does Salem's Lot break the mold? Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Before we get into the full discussion, which will be about Salem's Lot, we're here to give you movie recommendations like we always do each week. So, guys, let the people know what's the best recent thing that you've seen.
I don't have a movie. I've been doing too many series, and I probably should change that for next week. But this week I watched the Mr. McMahon documentary on Netflix. So immediately that's of no interest to you, Daniel, because one, it's a documentary, and two, it's about wrestling. So I can't imagine you.
For two.
Yeah, exactly. But it was just like interesting because, like, you know, wrestling was a big part of my childhood. I loved it, especially like the Attitude Era. Kind of fell off it recently, but it was just kind of good to kind of get a bit of the history and like some of the backstory and like learn some like new things as well about sort of, you know, kind of the wrestling world and sort of where sort of the company was at certain points and this and the other, and just again some of the scandalous stuff that happened in the background as well. So if you are a wrestling fan, actually I wouldn't even say if you're a wrestling fan, if you just like are into like documentaries and you do like to learn about sort of, you know, real life characters, and this one is definitely one worth checking out because Vince McMahon is definitely an interesting character in all the right and wrong ways possible. So that's my recommendation.
What I watched was a show called The Resort, a drama series pretty much based on a couple who go, I don't know if it was a honeymoon, but they just end up going on an island. I think it was Hawaii, and it pretty much turns into like some true crime story conspiracy when the girlfriend ends up finding a phone in the woods after a crash. And then her and her couple go on some next detective couple search for answers, pretty much. I'm only on episode 2, or was it 3? So far it's all right because it's got a comedic tone to it as well, which so it's like I wouldn't say it's a comedy mystery, but it's definitely got like a comedic tone to it. So that's why I was a bit reluctant to watch it. But after seeing Christine Milotti, I think after seeing her in The Penguin, and obviously I saw her in How I Met Your Mother as well. But after seeing her in The Penguin, I was like, I need to watch more of her stuff. So I kind of went on a, deep dive into the stuff that she's done, and I sort of realized, oh, this looks pretty decent. Saw it, wanted to go watch it. I was like, okay, so far so good. So I'd recommend it so far from episode 2 or 3.
So my best thing was Entourage, which is a 2003 drama comedy series. Ran for 8 seasons on HBO. And it's essentially about this actor and his entourage who are trying to make it in Hollywood. And it's essentially a study of how Hollywood works and what it takes to succeed in Hollywood. And it's kind of equal parts kind of juvenile fantasy and also kind of critique of Hollywood in general. And it's kind of both of those at the same time. And it's kind of a look into how Hollywood worked kind of before the current era, when stars were a lot bigger and there was a lot less scrutiny on Hollywood and that sort of thing. And it's essentially follows this actor who, as he gets his first break as Aquaman, and which is a surprise hit that nobody expected, and then he becomes this massive actor, and suddenly he gets all these opportunities, and it's all these ups and downs. It's a really well written, really funny drama that is a lot of fun to watch, and it's also kind of this time capsule of this is kind of what Hollywood was like before people started paying attention, that sort of thing. So it's actually gotten more interesting over time. I think it's like on a surface level, it looks like it should have aged really poorly because it kind of glamorizes that time. But then it also kind of just portrays it. Like Harvey Weinstein shows up in a couple of episodes and he does not look like it's not a good look, for instance. But that was before all the scrutiny that was applied to him, that sort of thing. So it's kind of gotten more interesting over time, not less, I would say.
I actually heard a lot about Entourage, actually. And I didn't realize it was that old. But it's just like one of those like classic TV series that I never got around to watching. Things like that and like things like The Wire as well. But definitely sounds interesting.
Yeah. And it also kind of it's like the reason I'm mentioning it is not just because I enjoyed watching it. It's just a really well-crafted show. But it's also kind of got a reputation for being kind of trivial, right? Like that's kind of just like this juvenile fantasy. And there's a little bit more to it than that, and I think, like, especially in hindsight, there's a bit more to it than people give it credit for.
Guys, the main event. That sounded so unenthusiastic, but that's because of what we're about to react to. Before we get into that, Daniel, can you please tell the people know what Salem's Lot is about?
So Salem's Lot is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel about a small town in rural Maine that gets taken over by vampires, essentially. And it follows a group of people who realize that this is happening and who kind of try to fight back. And things develop from there. So what did we think of the new adaptation of Salem's Lot?
I really don't have much to say about this movie. And that's because I didn't really have a great experience with it. When I saw the trailer, it looked decent. I wasn't expecting too much from it, but I wasn't expecting it to be a bad movie. I wouldn't say that this movie was bad, but it wasn't like it was more so boring than bad. I didn't really enjoy my time watching this movie because it just felt like the tone of it just felt very inconsistent. Like I didn't like there were times where, like for example, there were times where you'll see funny scenes, but you wouldn't even know if those like funny scenes were intentional. Or like it just made it feel like it felt very inconsistent when it came to the tone, and it felt like I was watching a mid-budget early 2016 type of film. It could have been shot better. That's number one. Well, that's number two. And I had an issue with the way the group kind of like came together to deal with certain situations. Like how the group came to be just didn't really seem authentic enough. It was like they just got a group of random people and a kid, or random adults and a kid, and they put them together to go against vampires. That's literally what it felt like when I was watching this movie. It didn't feel like a movie, I'll be honest with you. It felt very odd. It felt like this experience was a strange experience because even though I said it wasn't a bad movie, it was just a boring one because it didn't feel cohesive enough. So that's what I gotta say.
Yeah, I'm very indifferent about this movie. Like, I could see how it could have been a good movie if they probably gave it a longer runtime and let a few things flesh out. In this, I've read like Stephen King novels. He's like a really good writer, but it seems to be like this like struggle to like adapt his books into movies. But I could see what the story was, and I could see the potential in the story. It's like super simple. You've got sort of this like writer coming back to his like hometown, and then just like kind of like going on this journey as like things unfold in the town. And like I was very much on board with it for sort of the start of the movie. I was like quite enjoying myself, and I wouldn't say that I didn't enjoy myself throughout the movie, but I was just kind of left wanting more throughout. Like there's this whole like thing about like the town being taken over by vampires, and half of it's happening off screen. We're not really like seeing that happen. And I think you touched on kind of like this group coming together as well. And it's just like, I don't think it was like fully fleshed out. And I feel like an extra like 30, 40 minutes to just add a little bit more to sort of some of the things that were happening in this movie would have sort of done it a bit more service, because I don't think it's a bad movie. I don't think it's a bad movie. It's just one that's just shorter than it should have been. And yeah, like it's actually really difficult because like there isn't really much to say about this movie, to be honest. It's probably one of the few movies this year that there isn't really like kind of like much to it. Like there isn't anything that like I like deeply dislike about the movie to like kind of like go on this like massive critique, and there isn't anything really there to like really love and sing and sing and dance about either, to be honest, which is why I'm a little bit kind of indifferent about this. But I'll pass on to Daniel.
Yeah, so I think I can find some critiques if you give me a minute. What's striking to me about this movie is about how half-assed it is. Like everything about it just falls short, right? So the characters fall a little bit short, the plot falls a little bit short, the way the vampires take over the town falls a bit short, the way they're defeated in the end is a bit meh, right? And that's kind of the bottom line of all of this. Like everything feels kind of rushed and phoned in, and there was no real point to any of it in the end. And that's really the part that really struck like that really killed the movie for me, where individually all of the parts are at least fine, right? Like they're not it's not a train wreck, it's not the worst thing ever, it's not atrocious, but it just fails to go anywhere on any level. That's kind of my bottom line with this movie.
Did you guys feel like, did you understand what type of vampire movie this was? Because I'll be honest with you, yeah, It's not that I was confused. It just felt like it didn't really have an identity when it comes to, because usually with vampire movies, there's like a specific niche, right? This one didn't feel like, it felt like it was a bit mixed, because I was getting like, for example, the main vampire, right? Barlow. I was getting like Nosferatu vibes from him. But at the same time, they're like Nosferatu vibes mixed with a bit of, like that American town, like the modern day. Do you know what I'm saying? So it was like, I get it, like the two can kind of mix, but at the same time, it just didn't feel like his character, number one, his presence. I think his presence was lacking. I just think, for example, especially like the build up to what happens. He was supposed to be their climax, and then for it to end the way that it did, it just felt like it was missing a presence, like a vampire presence that you usually get from other movies than this movie. It just felt like he was put there to spread a virus, to turn other people into vampires.
So the point of Salem's Lot is to essentially be a reconstruction of vampires. So it's the whole idea of, it's essentially Dracula. So Dracula is essentially about vampire moves to London, starts taking over London, right? Starts terrorizing people, starts feeding on people. And the idea is essentially to take that into the modern day, into a small town in Maine, because all Stephen King stories are set in Maine, right? So that's the whole idea. Like, you take the vampire and take its classical tropes completely straight, and then you put them into the modern day, and then you watch them win. That's the idea. That's what the story is about. And I think on that level, so I read the book like 10 years ago, and I remember really liking it, but I didn't remember too many of the specific plot points, or like I'm not hugely invested in the story or anything. So I said, hey, I'm up for some vampire stuff, and I like monstrous vampires, and I vaguely remember that the vampires win in the end by this one, so that should be interesting. And then none of that really happened. Like, I think the one good thing about this is the vampire designs. Like, every time we just saw the vampires, I was totally on board for it, right? Like, I think one of my favorite shots is when they go to, I think it's Mark's parents, right? And they realize that there's like two vampires just standing on the roof and just watching, and then kind of just keep driving, right? Or when Mark is in the treehouse, and all his friends have been turned into vampires, and they're kind of clawing at the outside of the treehouse, and then you zoom out, and there's like 20 of them, and you see the glowing eyes and like just surrounding the treehouse. Stuff like that is really cool. So every time there was a vampire on screen, and every time they did something, I was really on board. It's everything else that's terrible, I think.
Yeah. Let me talk about Barlow's design, because I think you guys are a little bit more into some of the vampire stuff than I am. And to me, like, looked significantly different to kind of like seeing a Dracula in a movie, in, whatever movie I've seen him in. But, in terms of like this interpretation and this kind of take on like the vampire design, is that kind of like common in like other stories, or was this maybe something you liked, or a bit of a misstep for Barlow's design?
So this is very much the pre-Twilight stuff, right? Where they are walking corpses that hypnotize people, and they have to be invited inside and stuff like that, right? So this is very much classical vampires, and it is played very straight. I don't think they bring up garlic or any of that stuff, but there's holy water, there's crucifixes, all of that stuff is just played completely straight. And I think it's like, these are proper vampires in that sense.
So, question. I can agree as well. I did like the design of the vampires. That was probably one of the very few, I don't even want to say this one, but one of the very few positive things about the movie. But in terms of the vampire itself, Barlow, how did you feel about his character and how he was introduced and how his story transpired?
I mean, to me, again, there was a lot lacking in the story, in like kind of like what was going on. Like, you knew his motivation, or you knew what he was trying to do, but at the same time, there wasn't enough kind of like there. Like, there was not enough kind of like explained about like his like motivations and why he was doing something, or what he wanted to do, and this, that, and the other. And he just kind of was just there in the background. And I probably, like, for the most part, I kind of like forgot about him and was like more concerned about like the other people that are turning into vampires, and obviously they kept kind of like mentioning him. But I don't know, like you said, like his presence wasn't felt enough. He wasn't like kind of like villainous enough. And even when he did appear like towards the end of the movie, it was a bit like kind of like whatever. And I felt like they kind of dealt with him pretty easily. And I really hated the scene when Mark was like underneath whatever like rubble he was under, and like he kept like poking his hand like through, and like trying to like grab him or whatever. I just felt like that was like you see that type of stuff with like, you know, you're kind of like your big monsters and this that, and the other, and it just felt weird seeing it like from a vampire instead of him just kind of, I don't know, doing anything else in that scene. It did lead to a cool kind of like visual scene where he like puts a stake through his mouth, and then you could kind of like see him send him through the mouth. I thought that was like a cool visual. But overall, his presence and his threat was kind of like lacking for me, and that kind of rolls into other aspects of sort of the movie where people are slowly turning into vampires, but you're not seeing it apart from like a few shots to show that like there's a few people like missing in the town, or like businesses are like kind of sort of being abandoned and stuff like that. You're not seeing it happen, so that then takes away from the threat of him essentially.
So just about Marlowe himself, I think it's okay if he doesn't have a terribly compelling motive. If he's just there to take over the town because that's what he does, that's fine. It's about what happens because of that, right? But he also didn't have much of a presence, or he wasn't terribly memorable. He was just Vampire Man, right? I think that was one big problem, where if there had been something about him that's more memorable, that could have improved things. But yeah, I think you hit on the really big problem with this movie, which is that the entire thing is that the town is slowly being taken over and nobody knows and nobody cares, right? And it should have been very meticulously crafted at how people are slowly disappearing, like pieces slowly being taken off the board. And before you know what's happening, it's like by the time you know what's happening, it's too late, right? Towards the end, we get this thing about how like the newspapers are piling up on people's lawns and whatever, and there's like a line about how I can't get hold of anybody or whatever, but it's very half-assed. It's very phoned in. Like they should like that is the part that they needed to get right, and they didn't.
Yeah. And that would have tied into the investigation into it being a lot better as well, because like you then would have had like the gang come together in a better way than they did in this movie, and then you would have had them actually like slowly starting to piece things together better, and that would have like kind of like brought the audience along on the journey as well, of sort of kind of like discovering what was happening, as opposed to it just being like thrust upon us as to like what was happening. And I feel like they probably could have like even slowed down with the introduction of the vampires as well, and like kind of like start with like the mystery of people going missing, and then like kind of like tease it in the background before kind of like showing us actually what was happening.
Yeah, like it gets introduced very abruptly, and it's very clear what's happening from minute one. And normally I'm kind of for that, just from a general structure point of view. Like I like it when things get to the point quickly, but here like there's no sinister build up, right? There's no looming presence. There's nothing happening in the background, right? You know exactly what's happening from minute one.
Yeah.
Daniel, you read the book, so if from what you can remember, what did they take out from this movie? Like, what didn't they? Well, so you can't say everything that they didn't include, but do you think they took out anything from this movie, or didn't include something in the movie that you found that was interesting in the book that could have been included in this movie?
So it's been a long time since I read it, like at least 10 years. But notably, the vampires win in the book, and kind of the survivors kind of narrowly get away, and then they kind of regroup, and then I think the book ends with, I think in the epilogue they come back to Salem's Lot to kind of pick up the fight again. But they don't defeat the vampires in the story, right? The vampires just take over, and gets bleaker and bleaker over time. And there's just this veil of fatigue and tiredness that kind of falls over the town. And and people don't even realize. It's like cattle being led to the slaughter. Like by the time they realize what's going on, if at all, it's too late for them. It's kind of the whole idea.
But do you think that was intentional, though? In terms of
on whose part, like changing that was intentional.
In terms of like people not realizing that people are getting picked off one by one, because that's pretty much a reflection of the town.
That's in this, but what the big difference is that the heroes win in the end, and they win very easily, right? It's just a fight. There's nothing where I say, okay, this is the culmination of what's been going on, or who these characters are, or there's something important, or like the thing about the vampires hiding in the trunks is, number one, stupid, and number two, I think it's supposed to kind of feel like payoff to something that's been set up, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would they hide there? Why aren't they just hiding in the basements? Why are they hiding at all if they've taken over the town? Stuff like that, right? Like that entire sequence is just nonsense. and then they just kind of win by fighting them, and that's kind of it. And I think the story is much more interesting if like winning means getting away alive. Like that's just like a more interesting story. And I don't know why you would change this is not a small detail, right? This is like the point of the story. And if you just change it to something much more generic that fails to really like be interesting in any way, shape, or form, I don't know. I don't see what they were getting at with this. Did they just not get it and thought, well, like they have to win in the end, right? And that's so they're gonna win. Like I don't understand.
Yeah, I think it ties into what you're saying about like all of this being half-assed. It's like, okay, you're going to change it to give it a bit more of a Hollywood ending, but then you don't know how you're going to kind of like implement that Hollywood ending in terms of like what have the characters learned across this journey? Like what have they like kind of like discovered that's going to kind of like help them with this sort of the last fight, as opposed to it just being a stake through the heart, just like sort of any other sort of vampire. Because like you can do that to any old vampire, but then when it gets to Barlow, there has to be like something a little bit more. Like there has to be something else to kind of like make him feel a little bit different, a little bit more special. And I know that there was a scene where I think it was like the crucifix wasn't working against him, or it was kind of like something to do with like the pastors like kind of like waving faith or something like that, which didn't entirely make sense, because does that mean that like everyone in that town was like super diehard religious, and so the cross works for everyone?
I think it didn't work for the doctor, right?
It did.
Do you remember correctly?
In which,
well, it took her 2 attempts or something. There's a scene where I think they are. So that's the scene where they go to. Is it? I don't remember who it was, but there's like this person who has just died. It might be Mark's mother. I'm not sure. And she's kind of in the morgue, and the doctor is kind of trying to prove to herself and to the others that this is not a vampire, right? And so when the sun sets, the body comes alive, and then they have this fight with the improvised crucifixes with like the tongue depressors and stuff like that, right? Number one, they did not apparently prepare for the scenario. Like they're trying to prove that the vampires are real, and they didn't prepare for the scenario that there might be a vampire. So that entire scene was kind of just deflated. But I think the first time she uses a crucifix, it doesn't work right away or something like that. I don't remember. It's
because they have to like bind it together. Because like, at first it's like two sticks together, and they're like, no, you actually have to like bind it or something like that together to actually get it to work. And then once they do that, then it does work in the scene.
How do you guys feel about character performance? Because personally, for me, I think that's what for me, it felt kind of hollow. And I don't necessarily blame them. I just think character motivation that was given to them kind of set them up to fail. It just didn't feel stakey enough, if that makes sense.
Ironically. And I think the worst in this is Ben. Everything about him is terrible.
Who's Ben again?
The main character.
His introduction seems so random. I'm so sorry, but carry on.
I'm building up to that. It's worse than you think. So, like everything. So there's this long sequence, right, when he arrives in town and he gets settled and he rents a room and all of that, right? So he comes back to his hometown, right, to do some research. Apparently, on the circumstances under which his parents died, which was some kind of car accident or something. It does not matter. That does not matter at all, right? His reason for coming to town is just an excuse, right? It doesn't say anything about him. It doesn't further anything in the plot. It doesn't give him some kind of special insight or whatever. Like at first, I thought like this is like the vampires have done this before, and his family, his parents were the last victims or something, because there were like multiple events where people died, like in fires or whatever it was, But it doesn't seem to be that. I think the vampires were there for the first time, right? But it looks like he's on some kind of mission where kind of him doing research for a book is kind of cover, but he's really there is kind of to dig into the mystery of how his parents died, right? Which happened when he was very young, and the official story, it's kind of implied, is not the whole story, and so he's trying to figure out what that is, right? And for that reason, he came back to his hometown, but that kind of just gets dropped right away, right? Like I don't think it makes any kind of difference in terms of like where things go, right? And then there's this thing about Susan reading his book and not recognizing him. feels like a character moment, either for her or for him. Like maybe he's not as big of an author as he thinks, or she's not as educated as she thinks, or whatever, right? Like you would think that's the kind of thing they're doing. And I didn't detect that at all. Like it just seemed to be there to fill time because somebody thought it would be a cute scene.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to mean anything. It doesn't seem to go anywhere.
And that's what was lacking. Sorry,
Yeah.
just to quickly cut you know, it was like I didn't understand the reason for this movie because I didn't understand the reason for certain decisions that was happening. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like this, like the main, like the beginning of the scene, like even where obviously they meet each other, Ben and Susan, right? Yeah, that scene, like you would have thought that would have had some sort of impact throughout the story, like part of the story. I do understand that kind of tells okay, he's not big of an author, but still,
I mean that's a possibility for what that might mean, but I don't think the movie actually goes there. And I think it actually makes the point of, he thinks he's a big shot author, but then he doesn't get recognized or something. But then why is she reading his book of all books, right? Whatever, right? It feels like it should mean something, and it feels like it should be kind of a stepping stone in a character arc or something, but it's not. I don't think. I don't think it rises to the level of meaning anything.
I'm saying I think the only reason it's there is to just kind of like be the first stepping point for like their relationship and them kind of getting together, which again it's not terribly interesting.
And then another example of this is like there is actually a theme in this, right? I found a theme, and that is that evil triumphs when good people do nothing, right? So that appears in multiple different places, right? So it happens when Mark is being bullied, and the camera shows like 6 teachers who are supposed to be on watch duty, right? And they are just standing there smoking and talking, and so that other teacher has to cut his lunch short to step in, right? So again, this is good people doing nothing. Father Callahan and the sheriff have this debate as well, where the sheriff has just completely given up on life and everything for some reason that's not explained, or that we don't get much insight into. Like this whole idea of good people doing nothing, like, is relevant to the story of Salem's Lot, right? Because that's how the vampires are able to take over. But we don't actually see that this is the downfall of the town, right? We are just shown like I've forgotten a bunch now, but there's like at least 4 instances of good people doing nothing, and it's clearly supposed to be there, and it's clearly trying to say something, but it just fails to actually be realized, right? Like it doesn't actually inform the story in any meaningful way. Like the vampire takeover just happens, and we are told about this idea that good people do nothing for a long time, or over and over repeatedly. But that's not what drives the story, and that's not what leads to the vampires winning. Only insofar as like the heroes are the ones who do something, right? They are the good people who do something, but they are like 5 people out of an entire town. Yeah. And the whole point of like the reason Salem's Lot fails is because the good people of the town do nothing, right? So it's very clearly a theme that's there, and it's there on purpose, right? It's very explicit, but it doesn't connect to anything, right? It doesn't actually then turn into a story.
No, I agree, and I think obviously that's because they lacked character building.
I think just care in writing, like they didn't say, okay, what is it that we actually want to do? It's a bit like somebody was told to write a script, and so he wrote a script, but it doesn't feel like. And they kind of put pieces in there that felt like the sorts of things you are supposed to put into a script, but it wasn't really motivated. Like that's what it feels like. Because it's like it's not like this stuff is not entirely random. Like it all feels like it's supposed to be part of something, but then it's not.
Yeah. How does this compare to other vampire movies that we've seen? Because for some reason I get like, I don't know why, but I got like 30 Days a Night type of vibes from this from this film.
The vampires are a lot like those,
Yeah, especially the scenes where they're like standing on the roof. So I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. That was pretty neat too. So you know what? Okay, I'm gonna ask that question afterwards. But for you guys, how would you say this compares to other vampire movies which you've seen?
So this made me want to watch The Strain again, because it's basically the same story, right? So The Strain is also about vampires as infectious disease, and it's about them taking over a city, and it's happening in the background, and there's a couple of people who know about it, but they don't have enough power to actually do anything about it, and the actual authorities are kind of asleep at the wheel. And The Strain is not a good series exactly, but like the first couple of episodes where this happens before the vampire takeover is great, and it's much, much better than this. Like if you like the idea of this, just watch The Strain.
That would be great.
I'm not too versed on vampire stories. I mean, the only one that really comes to mind is Annabelle from the start of the year, and that's a much better movie than what this is.
Yeah.
I mean, I have seen movies with vampires in them, but because I don't really like them too much, you guys know, like I'm not really into like the whole aspect of things. Nothing really like kind of like springs to mind to do like any type of comparison with this, but I can see how this could easily be done better in a lot of other movies, because the idea of it is like you said, it's all good, and sort of the premise of sort of vampires slowly taking over, like while people are sort of kind of like not doing anything, or sort of kind of like ignoring sort of like the obvious of what's going on, is very interesting, but it's just not in this movie. Maybe The Strain. Maybe I'll check out The Strain.
Yeah, check it out. It kind of goes to some weird places later on, but the beginning of it is quite good. So there's actually this line where when I think the doctor wants to convince the sheriff to stay and fight, and he says something like Salem's Lot is going to hell in a handbasket, and so is the entire country, and I'm just gonna get out of here. Like, so that's pretty much the entirety of his motivation for not putting up a fight, right? And he seems to be ahead of the curve just by realizing that something is going on. Everybody else doesn't seem to. But it's kind of just this idea of, oh, everything is doomed anyway, so why do anything? That's kind of pervasive in the story. And I didn't think the story justified it at all. It doesn't show why the people of Salem's Lot should be so complacent or so resigned. You could imagine something like if this was like Detroit or something, like something that's been really run down because like the economics of the region just evaporated and never were replaced with anything, and so people have been leaving and everything is slowly dying. And apologies to any viewers in Detroit if that's a caricature, but that's kind of how it comes across as. Like in that situation, I understand people being complacent and jaded and not feeling like there's any point to doing anything. But Salem's Lot is like an idyllic little town where nothing bad seems to have ever happened other than like an accident 20 years ago. Right? Like, was there a reason?
It was like a community as well, where where the first boy kind of went missing, and you had the whole like community coming out and doing
everybody cares
parties and stuff like that. Yeah, and there was like loads of people like attending the funeral and kind of like discussing what happened and stuff like that. So yeah, it didn't quite give off that vibe, essentially, that was like some doomed town that sort of everything was kind of going to shit.
You know what I think? Why they had such a why that town was already doomed. Maybe it was because some people were open to the idea, because with Sarah's mom, by the way, which for me was a highlight moment. Do
you mean Susan?
When sorry?
Susan.
Sorry, yeah, Susan. I'm terrible with names. But Susan, when she ended up transforming, obviously the scene with her mom, maybe that was already there was already like people within that, because I think there was some people I think that was the scene that was telling us there's already people within that community that know what's going on, and obviously some people already were open to the idea of living. Did that town have like a reputation of like a old population there? So it was like while we were watching the movie, did we see? Because I felt like I saw a lot of old people there, so maybe it was a thing where they were open to, obviously, and there was funerals too, so maybe it was the thing where they were open to just living forever.
It didn't seem to be that kind of town, like where everybody's left and only the old people are left. You see young people, you see middle-aged people.
School full of kids as well. School full of kids. You see sort of Mark's parents, stuff like that. They were like kind of like not terribly old in this as well. It didn't quite give us that vibe.
But the scene with Susan and her mom, because she gave a speech about, was it this is a gift of like forever living or something like that, but she was pretty much saying that this is a gift. So with that scene, I thought maybe she was trying to tell us something that we missed that relates to why the town was so pretty much, why the town was doomed from the get-go.
That did not make any sense to me at all. I did not buy that she would make this sudden shift. I think there's like a scene where they're in the library and they talk about how hard it is to find a good man or something. Mm-hmm. And then when this sophisticated European guy moves into town, like he gets attention. And that kind of seems to have been kind of the stepping stone towards her kind of becoming like a cultist. but I did not understand like what her big problem was that was solved by serving Marlowe, right? Like I've seen in other stories where like people serve vampires because they want to be immortal and they think if they serve them long enough, they eventually will be made a vampire and something. So that happens, and I've seen that before, and I didn't see that here. I didn't understand why, like what her motivation was.
The only deal we understand from her is that she doesn't want her daughter to move away because her husband's passed away. But like you said, that doesn't quite equal then sort of serving Barlow in this in this scene, because that doesn't. Maybe if she helps turn her daughter into a vampire, maybe she stays a little bit longer. But I don't think that's necessarily how she like pictured it initially, or that's how she would have envisioned this in this sort of movie.
Her entire thing was controlling her daughter so that she doesn't also leave her, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, what's the connection between that and serving a vampire?
Mm-hmm. But the setting to like the tone that was already set of this movie was death. So obviously, serving a vampire is pretty much you're receiving in exchange the gift of life, which comes with death, but at the same time, it's a gift of life. So I think that was mainly the theme, even though
I feel like with like all of this is that if a lot of this was, you know, a little bit more fleshed out, which is why I say there's like an extra like half an hour, there's an extra 45 minutes of this movie where you're getting into the meat of things, as opposed to just kind of like flashing over like a lot of these themes and a lot of sort of the stuff that's happening in this movie. You could have easily made sort of this a much better movie if you kind of just like added a little bit more meat to sort of the story that you were trying to tell here, because, you know, none of what we're discussing here are like bad ideas. None of what we're discussing here is like, you know, things that are absolutely breaking a movie. It's all things that are just like, we just wanted a little bit more. We just like, it just needed a little bit more explanation, or we just needed a little bit more of an understanding. You know, there's like obviously like being vague, and there's like kind of like, you know, leaving things up to be up for interpretation. And then there's just not giving enough information at all as to sort of kind of like, don't know what's meant to be going on.
Yeah. And here's my genius rewrite of how to do Salem's Lot, right? If you're gonna kind of just use the name and then do your own thing with it, which this only does insofar as it changes the ending just by doing the opposite. It doesn't seem to actually have a different take on it. Make it about social media and doom scrolling. Like that's the story, right? So everybody's resigned to how terrible everything is, and it's just focused about what's right in front of them, and they don't see the actual world around them, and they don't actually interact with other people. They are just constantly engaging with how terrible and pointless and bleak everything is. And that is how and the vampire kind of takes that place, right? That's what the vampire exploits, because people don't care about or have been conditioned to no longer care because it's pointless. That's where the vampire comes in, and that's where the vampire takes over, because the vampire requires that you care, and you've been conditioned to not care, then that's when the vampire wins. That's my rewrite. Let's make it about people being just on their phones all the time talking about climate change and overpopulation or war or whatever, like whatever terrible thing is going on, and as a result, by being obsessed with every bad thing that happens in the world, which may or may not be actually happening, but because they're so absorbed, they don't even perceive their environment anymore. And that's why the vampire can take over. That's my rewrite. That's how you update that story to 2024.
No, I understand. There needs to be a reason why there's like just pretty much carelessness and not being aware of your surroundings. And this movie, unfortunately, ain't like that.
And I think that's how you kind of justify why a fairly nice town is so jaded, because they've been reading the news, because they have Twitter. That's why the vampire wins. That's my hot take. That's how you reimagine Salem's Lot.
I'd watch that movie, man. I'd watch that movie. Okay, well, you know, I think we've been, I wouldn't say negative, but at the same time, look, man.
There's not much to be positive about, right? So it's kind of hard to talk about this movie because kind of the critique is make it suck less, right? Just everything a little bit better. Like make characters better, make the themes better, make the plot better. But like that's lazy criticism, right? But it's kind of what's happening here. Like everything is just a little bit meh. And I don't think you need to fundamentally change what's going on here. There's a whole bunch of like hokey scenes, right? I mentioned earlier about how the characters come together, and then there's the thing about how Mark suddenly becomes an expert driver and stuff like that, right? Or like the various fight scenes, and it's all very hokey and very stupid, and it doesn't need to be that way. Like you could easily have constructed a way where Mark and Ben kind of each contribute different skills. Maybe Ben does the physical part, and Mark does does the book stuff or whatever, right? You could have done it in a way that's less ridiculous and more believable, more engaging. But all of it is just really underwhelming. Like really, everything is really just barely there. And so that I think makes it more frustrating than some of the other bad movies we've seen this year. Like there's some like this is not like Rebel Moon and Madam Web and all of these things are worse than this movie, but those are kind of explicable, right? You can see, okay, this is just how this is just what Zack Snyder wanted to make, or this is just how broken Sony is as a movie studio or whatever. And you can kind of do an autopsy, and there's a story there. I don't think there's a story here. I think this is just a bad, mediocre movie that somebody just phoned in because it was a job. And with a creative endeavor like a movie, somebody has to care about something. And that person was on holiday when this movie was made.
Yeah. I wonder how Stephen King would feel about this film. So what we're saying is, because that was going to be my next question, was there anything that surprised you about this film? But I mean, in a more positive, like a positive context, was there anything that was highlight moments for you, relationship dynamics? What did you actually enjoy from this film, or enjoy about this film?
I mean, I know Daniel said he didn't like Ben. I didn't mind him. Again, there wasn't anything like an awful lot to him, but I didn't really mind him that much in this. And like the whole dynamic between him and Susan was kind of cute in this. The most kind of what the fuck just happened moment was when they had Susan in the trunk of the car, and you're kind of obviously they're oh, they probably need to stab her, and they're hesitating about it. And you're waiting for something to kind of interrupt it, but I didn't expect the mum to just shoot with a shotgun. Who did she shoot? Oh, she shot the okay, and just took her out. That one really took me by surprise. I was like, oh,
yep.
Damn. That was a little cool moment in this in this movie. But yeah, and like you guys mentioned about kind of the vampires being on the houses and stuff like that. Those are also cool. Some of the shots, some of the visuals quite nice, especially the two boys that were kind of walking through the woods, and then that guy came and kind of snatched up the kid. That was a nice little visual there as well. So it's got some good elements to it. It's not all, again, it's not all bad. I for the most part kind of enjoyed it, whilst was wanting a lot more out of the movie. And Mark, the little kid, he very much gave Stranger Things vibe. The way he was kind of going about things, researching, investigating, this, that, and the other, being a little bit fearless and stuff like that. He was probably my highlight character in this.
That I agree with you. I see it seems like the adventure kid archetype is coming back. We had that with Sting as well earlier this year, and that felt like a throwback as well, but in a good way. It seems like people are doing something with that kind of character again. At the same time, everything about it felt really dated, I thought. It's something out of it felt almost like a period piece set in the 60s or somewhere between the 60s and 80s. Everything from the cars to the shops to how the children behave to just how the town works, the culture of it. It feels like a time capsule. It feels like a period piece. And I don't know that's on purpose. I don't know that was a stylistic choice. I think it's just they kind of took the inspiration a little bit too literally. And as a result, it felt like a theme park rather than an actual place a lot of the time. I don't know, was I the only one who got that vibe from it?
No,
why does everybody in this town have a 60s car?
I can feel that. I can see that. I have no idea.
Right? You know what I mean? It feels a bit like they just recreated something set in the 80s or made in the 80s, but then kind of just pretended it was today. I don't know. It felt weird.
I think my highlight moment and what surprised me was definitely, I said it briefly before, but whole Susan's transformation, obviously, in her mother, because I think her mother throughout the movie, well, whenever we saw her, she was dodgy. So kind of to see the build up and the reason for her dodginess was that she was actually a follower of Mr. Nosferatu. I think it was a pleasant surprise for me, and it was a nice surprise for me. I said, okay, that's probably like that's interesting. I think they could have low key. You know what I think the film could have been about as well is like it could have been about the people that will follow it. Like they could have gone into more in terms of what is it, Boran? What's his name again? The main vampire.
Marlo.
Marlo. Yeah, I think they could have like kind of like built mysteries around his followers, like who was a follower and who wasn't. I think that would have made it interesting too.
Yeah, like show us why somebody would follow him or why somebody would be that apathetic. That's like something.
Yeah.
Everybody seemed fairly normal in the town, right?
Yeah.
So
well, like what are they getting in return for sort of kind of like following him? Because that was very ambiguous as well.
My best thing absolutely was the vampires. Just the fact that they were allowed to be monstrous and that they were allowed to be creepy and magical. Like they're like a lot of vampires are either like the Twilight type, so not monsters, kind of romanticized, or they're kind of like the scientific vampires where it's like a virus or something like that. And this was just magic vampires. Like they had to be invited in, and they like crosses worked against them and stuff like that, right? So I kind of like that throwback. So that combination of being magic and being like classical monster, like proper monsters, that really worked for me. And I kept wishing like that was the movie.
We're gonna ask actually, Jonathan, because like when I was watching it, it did remind me of From and the whole aspect of like you've got these like kind of like monsters on the outside, but they have to be invited in. Was that is that inspired by vampires? Did you kind of like pick that up? Because obviously I don't know the vampire lore, but when I was like watching it, I was like, oh, that's like kind of like similar to what From does in terms of you have to let them house.
I'm not really big on vampires. Daniel's more big on vampires, but I did get that I picked up on that as well. Because when I was like, oh, you have to let me in, I didn't know that was like a thing. Because I know obviously there's garlic, there's the crosses, but I never knew that you had to let a vampire in. So was that like a theology which was created?
That's like the classical folklore. That's the classical folklore of vampires. Like like vampires are basically social predators, right? They manipulate you into being their victim. And they have all the trappings of sophistication and youth and wealth and all of those things, and but underneath is a wild animal, right? Like something that will like tear you apart if you let it. And part of that social predation is that they have to get you to invite them in. As long as you are behind closed doors and you don't fall for their lies, you're okay, right? That's where you're safe. But they will try to find a way to get you to invite them in, and once you do, they can enter your home, and then it's over.
Oh, well, that's a good thing to point. Sorry.
I can see how like From the series has borrowed a lot, even though they're like not explicitly vampires in the TV series, but I can see how they've like borrowed a lot from like vampire sort of lore then in that sense, because it's like From is literally all of that. Is that like they appear as human, they're like trying to manipulate you to get to the home. It's essentially all of what you said. And then once you kind of like give them an inch, they kind of like come in, and then you're pretty much dead at that point, essentially. So yeah, no, that's interesting. Adds a little bit to sort of know the watch of sort of know From.
And that ties again into that idea of vigilance, right? That if you just pay attention to your surroundings and like you're on the ball, then they're not that strong. But if you let down your guard and if you kind of don't pay attention, that's where they get you.
Yeah, no, we see that.
Well, I think we should probably end off in a good note by asking your last thoughts and ratings.
I'll sort of kind of go first here. This was a half decent movie. One that I'm not mad at seeing, but one that definitely could have had could have been much better than what it was if a little bit more care was put into this. I do wonder whether Stephen King has any input into sort of the movies that I've made, because I can imagine like he's a brilliant writer, and I can imagine that if he had more involvement in this, like kind of like George R.R. Martin has in something like kind of Game of Thrones and stuff like that, then a lot more of his like sort of kind of like book to movie adaptations might have been better. Maybe I'm wrong in that. Maybe he's been involved in sort of all the projects, and he just doesn't know how to like translate his books into movies.
I think he got involved in one once, and it was the worst that was ever made, or something. There's something about that. Something about that. I don't know the details.
Yeah, I need to check that. But of like, you find with this with like media is that like you don't necessarily have to like love like the kind of like IP that you're adapting, but you definitely have to have like a good sort of understanding and a good sort of appreciation for what you're adapting to then go ahead and make a good adaptation, whether you're changing it for like TV series and film. And I don't feel like that was present in this movie. I feel like, again, it was just a case of here's this IP, here's like something that everyone recognizes. We'll make a movie out of it, and we'll just kind of try to make it a bit of a popcorn flick. And yeah, in that sense, it's just really disappointing because this could have been so much better. Like this really had like so much potential to kind of do a lot more. So that's kind of like the summary of it. It's just a case of like this was just wasted potential, essentially.
For me, I'd say, yeah, I would agree that it was wasted potential. Even though I haven't seen the book, I do feel like, obviously from what Daniel said, I do feel like a lot was missing. I do think it was rushed for what reason, I do not know. Yeah, man. I honestly don't have much to say about this movie besides it was an okay experience. I think they could have done more. They could have kind of like focused more on the, character motivation mainly. They could have just made the stakes a bit more higher. Because I didn't feel like there was much. It just felt like they were just put there to be and just to shoot, rather than there actually being a story and there actually being motivation, there actually be consequences of motivation. Even though the consequence of the motivation was that they would turn into a vampire, that was just it. Like there wasn't anything else. But it had some cool moments. Like I said, especially with the vampire designs, the way that the vampires were pretty much shown in this movie was pretty cool. And I mentioned the scene with the mother and Susan. But yeah, man, overall I had a okay experience. I'd give this a 5 out of 10.
So I think this was the one I was most upset about when I left the movie theater this year. Not because it was the worst movie, but because it was the most pointless. Like it's just underwhelming on every front. Character, story, theme, like even action. Like it's kind of schlocky nonsense, but not in a fun way. Like there's just no compelling aspect to this, in my opinion. Like there's just not really anything you can really latch onto, and kind of that makes up for the rest of it. I like the vampire designs. I like that they're monsters and so on. We've talked about that, but that's not enough to carry the movie. Just the fact that there's vampires in it does not make it a good movie by itself. So for that, I'm giving it a meh out of 5.
I've just checked, and I could be wrong about this, but Stephen King was co-writer of the screenplay for Salem's Lot.
No, that's weird. One thing I wanted to kind of mention in my summary, and I kind of forgot, is that as this is an adaptation that's making substantial changes, right, to the story, like I think that's fine, but then you have to have like you have to earn your keep. You have to have an idea that's at least as good as the original, right? Mm-hmm. And this one just didn't have any ideas at all, right? And if Stephen King was involved in this, that's even more puzzling, because shouldn't he have had some kind of idea? Like, unless he was kind of just completely frozen out of the process or whatever, right? Like whatever the facts may be. Like this does not replace the original ending and the point of the original story with something better or equally interesting. It replaces it with nothing. Yeah. And that's kind of its biggest sin. Mm-hmm. Like I'm okay with an unfaithful adaptation if it does something that you can like or dislike, but at least it's there, and that's not even here. And if the original author was involved in that makes it even worse.
Flipping on. Well, it looks like we'll end it with a surprising fact of the day. I was not expecting that.
I don't. He wasn't main writer. I think it was like this Gary Dauberman. But to have like co-writing credits on this, like you have enough. You have enough, like saying you have like enough sort of input on sort of the idea, and like if you're taking things out, what are you sort of kind of like replacing it with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. So that's even more of a downer. Like this isn't even like a studio hack job, if that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Okay.
No.
On that note.
Yeah, guys. Thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. Hervé.
Yeah. Thank you for locking in with us. We are still on the road to 100 subscribers. We seem to be stuck at 92 at the moment. So if you are watching this, if you are enjoying the discussions, then, definitely subscribe. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts down below as well. Like, what did you think about this movie? And also for our Monday topics as well, if you do check them out, let us know if there's any sort of kind of like classic movies that you want us to check out as well. I'll probably wrong video for that. But, we do also do a Monday video. I think we've got The Thing coming out as well next week, Monday, which was a good movie that I wasn't part of. And now I'm waffling. So instead of that, like, share, and subscribe.
All right, guys, you heard it. You heard it from Saturday. You know what I'm saying? Thank you very much. We'll catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.